Hi, everyone. So this week we're going to be talking about Miriam. Let me share the screen with you. And so I have some ideas here which I'd like to share with you before we go to the presentation, which I think will be interesting, but most of the presentation is not really related to this week's parasha. However, all three of the siblings are in this week's parasha, both Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. And it's very, very interesting how the parasha begins, because the parasha, Hukkat, which begins in chapter 19, begins with a red cow. It's very interesting because I came across an interesting idea, which is that the para aduma, or sometimes called the red heifer, or heifer, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Heifer, thank you. Okay. And so, which in itself is such a strange idea. And we read this, more than once a year. I think we read it before Purim, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of those readings. So we read it twice a year. The whole idea is that if you have this red cow and you have the ashes, then you can make people who are impure pure again, right? And it's a little bit like magic and ashes that are, ground together. And so the whole thing is very strange. And that's how the parasha begins. And then right after that whole part, it's a long chapter. I just put a couple of things here in the PowerPoint. So that and chapter 19 ends, and then at the beginning of chapter 20, right after that, the Israelites arrived in the wilderness on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. There's nothing. It's just an announcement. It's as if you open up the newspapers and you see a death notice, right? Nothing, no details about where there'll be a shiva. Just she's buried there, and that's it. And then right after that, it says the community was without water, right? And we all know what happened. They joined against Moses and Aaron, and then Moses and Aaron, after futzing around a little bit, he ends up hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and he yells at them before he does that, right? He yells at them and he says, "Listen, you rebels," or another translation of the word hamorim. It could be also recalcitrant people, and the Hebrew is hamorim. I'll come back to that in a minute. Shall we get water for you out of this rock? All right. And then a little bit further down, we have Moses stripping Aaron of his priestly garments. He gives them to Eleazar. Aaron dies there. All right. And then they come down from the mountain. Moses and the new high priest, Eleazar, come down from the mountain. The whole community knew that Aaron breathes his last. Notice the strong difference between when Miriam died there and was buried there. And then it says, the whole community knew that he breathed his last. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron 30 days. And then that's the end of chapter 20, right? And then in the same parasha, you have this be'er, this well, this mysterious well, where God told Moses to assemble the people with a reference to the earlier well, the one that he hit the rock, all right? And then they have this song, which has absolutely no one knows where it comes from, where is it coming from? Spring a well, sing to it, the well was a chieftain's dug, which the nobles of the people started with maces, with their own staffs. And that's suddenly in there. Now, all of this is associated, wells, water, are all associated with Miriam, okay? And there was a very interesting suggestion. I don't really remember where I read it because I read a lot of different sources this week, that maybe Miriam should have died before the red cow. Why? Because if she had died before the red cow, right, before the story, all the people who handled her body could have now, right, they had been touching a dead body, her dead body, and they could have then become pure. And I thought that was a very interesting suggestion. So even the red cow incident, right, if you want to call it that, it's not really an incident, the whole red cow strange purification ritual, even that is being connected to Miriam, right, by some people who wrote this week. That very, very, very weird. And also, if you look at the Hebrew for Hamorim, right, and the way it's spelled, is no vav in there. It simply is Mem Resh Yud Mem, all right, which would spell Miriam, all right. So you'd have here the whole idea of the rebels, or the recalcitrant people, or the complainers, right? The people who are speaking up against Moses, being connected to. So a lot of people have come out with interesting fantasies that, including myself, in this week's Parsha, that perhaps Moses was very depressed, and really, didn't know what to do with himself after Miriam died. And perhaps that influenced him when he had no patience with all these rebels. So I thought that was really very interesting as far as Miriam was concerned. And of course, she is associated with water, and she's also associated with song. We'll see that as we continue. So in my original presentation, I didn't have anything about this week's Parsha there, but I thought that it would be interesting since the Shabbat will be Parshat Hukkat. Before we go on, would someone like to add anything? I'll just stop for a second if anyone would like to add something.
Yeah, if you have Hey Mem Resh Yud Mem, it's also Marim, the
Right.
bitter ones.
Right.
That's also what her name is.
Right. So you have a lot of possibilities there, right? And by the way, even though you also have Hamordim. If you put a dalet in there, you have the rebels, so that would make it even clearer that it's. But you don't have that in there. So yes, you have the bitter one, and you have a lot of associations there. Anybody else want to add something? Or maybe some of you also read some interesting midrashim this week. But everyone, if you just Google drashot this week on Miriam, you can find at least 10 of them, which I think was really fascinating, because usually people find other things to talk about. Okay, so I'll go back to sharing. Okay, so here we have an interesting picture from the Rijksmuseum, all right, where you have Aaron and Miriam and Moses. Is a very interesting picture here put together, so you have the three of them are siblings, which we know, and Aaron is the biological ancestor of all the priests. Moses is the redeemer of Israel from Egypt, and Miriam, their sister, leads the Israelite women in song. All right.
I think you should also point out that she's a prophet. That's a kind of a
in the song, right. So they call her Miriam HaNaviah in the song, right? We'll look at that in a minute, but absolutely, okay? And then you very rarely have mention of the three of them together, but in the book of Micah, it says, in fact, I brought you up from the land of Egypt, I redeemed you from the house of bondage, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, right? And you also have in Numbers 26, you have the name of Amram's wife was Yocheved, daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. She bore to Amram Aaron and Moses and their sister Miriam. And it's interesting is that Miriam comes at the end here, right? Because she's, I guess, a woman, because clearly if she's the sister who was guarding over Moses, then she would be older than Moses. But okay, we'll forget about that for a minute. Okay. So the names are very interesting, right? the names are interesting because Moshe means son in Egyptian, right? So like you have Ramses or Ram Moses, right? Ram Mosa, right? Or Tutmosa, right? Son of Tut, son of Ra. So Moses would mean simply son, right? Son of. And Miriam's name also has the word Mary, which actually, unlike your suggestion, Norman, means beloved, right? All right, which is interesting. So like Miriam would be beloved of Amun, or Mary Taten, right? Like Mary Taten, beloved of Aten, who's a god, all right? So very often the word Mary is associated when you have a theoparic element like related to a god, right? Like Aten would have been a god. Now the etymology of Aaron's name is less clear, right? But it does not appear to be Hebrew, and many scholars assume it's of Egyptian origin, although its meaning is debated. And one prominent suggestion is that it derives from aha, right, which would mean warrior lion. Okay, anyway, for whatever this is worth, it's not important, but it's interesting. We always are interested in names. And now we come to a very, very famous picture in the Duras Europa synagogue in Syria, which all of these were preserved with pictures, but I believe that they were destroyed. But for a long time they were intact. So here you have a picture of Moses. Here's Moses, baby Moses, being drawn from the Nile by presumably Pharaoh's daughter, or maybe one of the maids. It's probably not Pharaoh's daughter because she's depicted as not being dressed here. So probably, and then she's being handed to he is being handed to. It's not clear who these people are. Maybe the princess, who then perhaps hands him to Miriam, who then takes him to Yocheved. It's not clear what all of these things, but notice you have here these pictures with all sorts of gifts here. Very, very interesting picture. In the perhaps that's based on, right? Perhaps it's based on the Talmud in Sota 12b, where there's an explanation for why Miriam calls for her mother, right? The sister says to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call the nurse of the Hebrew women? Why just of the Hebrew women? It teaches that they handed Moses about to all the Egyptian women. So maybe this midrash is not midrash, maybe, because I should say actually the picture is a midrash, right? The picture itself is a midrash. And maybe it's influenced by this midrash, all right? To all the Egyptian women, but he would not suck. He said, shall a mouth which will speak, okay, leave it to our wonderful rabbis to demonize non-Jews, right? Shall a mouth which will speak with the Shekhinah suck what is unclean, right? Meaning from the Egyptian women, all right? And then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Rabbi Eleazar said it teaches that she went quickly like a young woman. And Samuel, the son of Nachmani, said she's called the maid Alma because she made the word secret. And Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away. Rabbi Chana ben Chanina said she prophesies without knowing what she prophesies, right? Helichi, take away, behold what is thine. Hashelichi, right? So in other words, this whole idea of taking away and sending away is perhaps a future prophecy which will happen. And then not only I'll give you the wages, Chama ben Chanina said not enough that the righteous had the loss restored to them, but they also receive their reward. So not only is the mother going to end up nursing her own child, but she's going to get paid for it. And look at that. That's amazing, right? because she's righteous. And then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron. Now we have a riff on the song itself, right? And Rabbi Amram said in the name of Rav, all right? It teaches that she prophesied while she yet was a sister of Aaron only. She said, my mother will bear a son who will be the savior of Israel. When Moses was born, the whole house was filled with light, and her father arose and kissed her upon her head, saying, my daughter, thy prophecy has fulfilled. But when they cast him into the river, her father arose and smacked her on her head, saying, where now is that thy prophecy? That is what is written. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him, what would be the fate of her prophecy. So here you have a nice little picture of a family where, according to the legend that you have here, the Midrash is because of her prophecies, she got all of the men to go back to their wives, Amram in particular, and that's how the reason that Moses was born. And so everyone was happy about that. But the minute they put him into the river, into the Nile, the father forgot how wonderful she was before and smacks her. And that's why they have to redeem her prophecy here and to show that she was in the right from the very beginning. So it's very interesting in the Babylonian Talmud. And it's clearly the rabbis feel that more has to be said about Miriam, not enough is being said about her. So they take every single verse and they do something with it. And then, of course, Miriam is mentioned again at the sea, all right? And she sings to the Lord, for he has surged, oh, surge, horse and rider, he hurls into the sea. And in our synagogue, I hope in all of your synagogues, we remain standing. We remain standing after Az Yashir is completed, and we stand for the conclusion of it, which is that Miriam took the timbrels, all right? And I personally, when I sing this in the synagogue, I use a different melody for the melody that I've been using all along. I use a different melody to differentiate it. And of course, there will be people who will say that Miriam actually wrote the song and of the sea, and Moses took credit for it. There's a lot of talk like that. I'm of that opinion, but okay. So we have here a little bit of the battle of the sexes. In the Mechilta, the Rabbi Yishmael, right, Miriam sang. Scripture says that just as Moses recited the song for the men, so Miriam recited the song for the women. So when it says, Shira Ladonai ki ga'o ga'o, just sis v'ramah, sis v'rochbo ramah vayam, right, sing to the Lord. When she sings that it's just a shortened version. She sings the whole song, right? In other words, that's one possibility, that he sings it and then she sings it, but they've only, instead of duplicating the whole song, they only take out a phrase. So this is one possibility, right? Tova Cohen, who was a religious feminist, I think she was in charge of the program of Bar Ilan, posits that Miriam's version of the song was a non-elitist rite, transforming the magnificent but incomprehensible prophetic song led by Moses into a chant easily learned by those who heard it. In other words, it's much easier to sing, one or two lines than it is to sing the whole song. So that solves an interesting problem. This appears in an article by Moshe Reese called Miriam Rediscovered. And then there's also this whole discussion, which I think those of you who have studied with me when we talked about the song in my Exodus class, Moses' version begins with the personal pronoun I, Shira, right? I will sing, whereas Miriam skips the reference to herself and immediately makes it an invitation to the group Shiru Ladonai. We should all sing together, all right? And so we have here somebody, meaning Moses, with a strong ego. I will sing, whereas Miriam is more involved in the group but doesn't put herself into the center. So this is like a very interesting look at the, if you want to call it the battle of the sexes, I don't know if that's correct, but anyway, it's an interesting way of looking at it. What else did I want to add about that? The other thing is Bata'an, right? The word Bata'an. Let me make that so you can see it with a color. Oh, I can't do that? No, I can't do it with color. Okay, I'll just make it very big. Bata'an. Just very big. Yeah, Batan. So Batan could mean she answered, or Ta'ana could also be a way of women's way of singing, or another way is that we have a duet. That we have a duet between like an alternative reading. One of them reads one line and the other one reads the other line. And that's another possibility. In other words, so there are 4 possibilities about the song. One is that Miriam is the author and Moses stole the authorship, right? Took credit. Another one is that each of them read it separately, but that the Bible only records a short one at the end. Or as Tova Cohen suggests, that perhaps it's to make it easier to remember. And the other possibility is that they read it as a duet, one line here, one line there. Okay. Any questions before we go on? Let me stop. Comments, questions? No? Everything's clear? No one? Okay. Now we'll go back. Sharing. Okay, so now, many years ago, I wrote this triptych, all right, which appears in some book. I forget what book it appears in. It appears in the Women's Seder Source Book, which was published in 2003. I apparently wrote this in 2000. The Miriam one I wrote first. I wrote the Miriam the first, and I called it Miriam the Bitter. And then later on, I don't know why I decided to do a triptych, but I did. And then I did a little bit of research, and I found that there was some legitimate reason for seeing it as a triptych. And usually once a year, I send this out to people for their Passover Seder. When you have the matzah and the maror and Pesach, right? So maror would be Miriam, as Norman pointed out. Matzah would be Moses, because he's the one who choseh, right? He breaks the sea, right? He breaks the sea. He breaks other things as well, right? And Aaron is the priest with the Pesach with the associated with the Paschal lamb, the sacrifices. So this is what I put together. So let's have 3 different people reading. So Sue, you read the first one, and Norman read the second one, and Louise read the third one.
Okay, Miriam the Bitter, Maror. She stands apart, one of 3, separate, different, sister to a priest, midwife, they say, to the leader. The waters broke. With song and delicacy, she pulled him out, and sweet water from hard rocks. As a child I knew blood, fear, endless crying. He was in my power. I gave my all. My reward? He was He has turned God against me, whiteness of skin, shielded from sun and friends, with no one to listen to my prophecy.
Moses the leader, Matzah, ill-tempered, hitter of rocks, breaker of tablets, parter of waves, wrecker of home life. He gets his way, no diplomat he. Leprosy makes his point. Pitiless provider of plagues, he casts his rod and parts the reed sea. She stands by his side with her timbrels and musical instruments. Duet, sing a song of sea, oh. Moment of glory, togetherness. The waters broke. She saved him and brought him sweet water from hard rocks. Homewrecker, jealousy,
Hey,
three
Stephanie.
leaders, only one is chosen.
Well, I'm good.
Abandoned ship, women first, wife, sister, then the brother. From heavy tongue to eloquence, Ailna Rafana La, please God, heal her. She puts music to his words. They wait.
Aaron the priest, Pesach, bowed down by sacrifice, bleating of lambs, mewing of cows, blood spewed. Wash, blood, wash, blood, wash. The heady rhythm of drums in background. Prayer forgotten, sons neglected. Always a spokesman, never a leader, except for one golden moment. Sacrificial calf transformed to idol. Heady stuff to be worshipped, chosen by people, never by God. He was on the mountain dialoguing with God. She was busy with song and healing. The people needed someone, something. He fashioned a golden symbol. It was rejected, caused chaos and death. His sons, punishment for arrogance. Impatience is a family trait. Pontifical remnants, priests, penitence, prayer. Sacrifice is always accepted.
Okay. What do you think of all of this? You have any thoughts about it?
I think it's a good summary of what they each did and stood for.
Okay. What about the tone?
Uh,
It's a little harsh.
Harsh. Okay. Yeah, I'm just, when I revisit things I've written in the past, it's always, and actually this should have, the El Never Find That last should be in italics. And I think I may have played around with the lines to get it to fit in here. I'm not sure. But
I actually like the Aaron one because what you said there was that one golden moment he became the idol. I thought of that when we were discussing it the other day.
right.
That he actually took advantage of that moment to be bathed in glory for once instead of being the brother of.
yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, had I read this before, I would have made that point. That's very interesting. Yeah, yeah. In other words, he now was in the limelight. And by the way, it's really interesting because he doesn't get punished. I mean, one could argue that the punishment is that his sons were killed, right? But it's never said that, although there is a midrash that sort of says something like that. Okay, let's go on unless somebody else would like to add something. So here we have we're coming up to the Cushite woman. I could have put this afterwards, the poem. I could have put it afterwards because I mentioned the leprosy, but okay, it doesn't really matter. So we have the episode with the Cushite woman, all right? And so presumably, although she doesn't look very black here, it's very interesting because it's not clear if the Cushite woman is black, right? Or if she is from Cush. It's really not clear. But I guess she is darker skinned than, okay, whatever. Okay, so here you have Aaron and Miriam rebelling against Moses, all right? And then she, we know, is the only one who's going to be punished with leprosy. And the question is why? We're going to look at that in a minute. But in general, when we look at Miriam in the Midrash, in general, when she's good, the sages love her, but when she's bad from their perspective, they snipe at her. And bad from their point of view is when she confronts Moses, all right? And so you have this very interesting Midrash here, which is in Deuteronomy Rabbah, when they say about Miriam, right? And it's on the phrase Zachor, right? In Kitei Say, in the book of Deuteronomy, you have remember what God did to Miriam as they left Egypt, right? So in other words, so a lot of the rabbis are riffing on that particular verse, right? So on that verse, remember what God did to Miriam. And the assumption is that what she did to Miriam, he gave her leprosy, right? So the rabbis say this can be compared to a king who returned in triumph from a war, and a noble lady sang his praises, like Miriam, right? And the king decreed that she should be called the mother of the Senate. Later, she began to quote this order in the royal provisions. Said the king thereupon, is that what she does? Let her be sent away to the mines, right? So when God waged war at the Red Sea, Miriam chanted a song, and she was named prophetess, as it is said, and Miriam the prophetess took, etc. When, however, she slandered her brother, God commanded that she should be sent to the mines, as it is said, and Miriam was shut up for 7 days, right? So this is very interesting. Midrash, it's clear that when she's good, they love her. When she's not good, they don't. And so there's really almost 2 Miriams in the Midrash. And this is the story, right? I assume that some of you remember it, but maybe not. This is Numbers 12. When they were in Hatzerot, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. And of course, because it says, but Tadaber, Miriam, Aaron in the feminine, right away, it's as if Miriam is the ringleader and she's the one who's going to get blamed for all of this, right? Because of the Cushite woman he married a Cushite woman, they said, all right? Now, in other words, are they speaking against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married? Or are they speaking against Moses for marrying a Cushite woman? Or are they speaking against Moses for neglecting the woman he married? It's really not clear what they're complaining about, but whatever it is that they complain about, and there's plenty of midrash about what they're complaining about, and Miriam in particular, they said, and here's where you have the rebellion, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? In other words, it's clear that they would like to be leaders themselves. They're jealous of the fact that God only speaks to Moses, and this is both Miriam and Aaron, and the Lord hears it. Now, Moses himself was a very humble man, more than any other man on earth. So he doesn't speak up, right? He's just quiet. So who has to take his part? God. Suddenly, the Lord called in to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you 3, to the tent of meeting. He speaks to them like they're 3 children, 3 siblings, 3, talk about sibling rivalry. So the 3 of them went out. The Lord came down in a pillar of cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out, Aaron and Miriam. The 2 of them came forward. Right? He only tells them to come forward, not the 3 of them. And he said, hear these my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises among you, I make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles. And he beholds the likeness of the Lord. In other words, it's clear he's the chosen one. In other words, I don't speak to him in a vision. I don't speak to him in a dream. I speak to him directly. How dare you? How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? You guys had a lot of nerve to speak against my servant, whose standing there very quietly, right? Because he's very modest. So he's like just standing there on the side, listening to Moses, listening to God screaming at them, and still incensed with them, God departs. As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow white scales. Why just Miriam? Why not Aaron? Why just her? Right? So of course the rabbis have to explain this by saying, because Batizaber Miriam, she was the ringleader in all of this. They blame her. And so when Aaron's, by the way, very, very interesting, when Aaron turned toward Miriam, he saw that she was stricken with scales. And Aaron said to Moses, "Oh, my Lord," notice he's groveling to Moses now, "account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly." In other words, don't, now, is he afraid that maybe he's going to also get leprosy? It's not clear, all right? But then he pleads for Miriam, "Let her not be as one dead who emerges from his mother's womb with half his flesh eaten away." So when he yells to Moses, "Do something," Moses cries out to God saying, "Oh God, pray heal her," right? And that's the shortest blessing in the Bible. El na rafa na la. But God said to Moses, "Well, if her father spat in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days?" Implying that she is to blame, and because she has to have some sort of punishment. Let her be shut out of camp for 7 days, and then let her be admitted. Right? Now, what's really very interesting, in contrast to what we saw up here in, let me just jump up for a second. In contrast to what we saw up here, that Miriam died and was buried there, and there was no fanfare, nothing done for her, right? In honor of her. Here, her popularity is such that even though the people are on the march, they wait for her for 7 days, and they don't march on until Miriam was readmitted. In other words, the people care about her, she's popular, and they wait, all right? And then they set out from Chasserot, and they went into the wilderness of Paran. It's an amazing story, and it's led to all sorts of midrashim, many of which are concerned to gossip. I'll come to that in a minute. But the story in itself is very, very interesting. And the unfairness here towards Miriam is really very great. And the rabbis, rather than be sympathetic to her here, actually blame her. They go on to blame her for all of this. And they have much to say about this. All right, so let's take a first look at some pictures of Miriam as a leper. Presumably, this is Moses praying, right? Praying. And this is Aaron sort of taking care of her. By the way, many, many years ago, I'll come to it later. One second. Here's a really, here's a really grotesque looking version of Numbers 12, right? So we have some really, besides the leprosy, we have some interesting things here in the background. Right? The cloud is removed from the tent, right? And then you have this. What is this? And here you have Moses presumably fleeing to God. Anyway, you have here really a lot of chaos, and she gets punished.
What is that? What is that in his hand? I mean, what is that thing?
What? I don't know. What do you think? I have no idea.
Okay, I thought it was a ham at first, but that might not be right, huh?
I have no idea. I have no idea. In fact, when I first looked at this right now, it looked like to me like this was Popeye with a pipe in his mouth.
I actually thought the same thing. So
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a figure blowing the cloud away.
Maybe. I thought maybe this is God's wrath. Maybe this is a picture of God's wrath.
It's weird.
Anyway, really weird. I have no idea who who dug this was done in 2019. June 6th. What's today?
July.
July 3rd.
Oh no, right. We're already in July. Jeez. Okay. I'm still in June. Okay. Anyway, here's another picture of Miriam shut out of the camp. And here you have a couple of midrashim, which are very interesting, which is, so the whole idea of Miriam, because it says, concerned with gossip, all right? The words "suffer not thy mouth to bring thy flesh into guilt" are addressed to Miriam. As soon as she spoke against Moses, she became leprous, all right? So in other words, the whole idea of her punishment being leprous because she spoke, right? It says in Hebrew, "Al titein et pich lachti et b'sareach." Don't let your mouth make you sin, right? Cause sinning to your flesh, right? That's my translation. I don't know what the translation is. Not the greatest they have here. Okay, and then it says, "Neither say thou before the message for al tomar lifnei hamalach." That's Moses, Moshe. Right? This is a midrash on Midrash Tehillim, and so this is the midrash, and it continues. "Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice? Thy voice, the voice that Miriam let escape from her mouth against Miriam the righteous." All right. Why is God angry? Because it's the same voice that she shouted against Moses, the Hatzadik, right? And destroy. I should have a space here. Oh, I don't know why I don't have a space here. And destroy the work of thy hands, that is, destroy the merit. All right. In other words, by this act of speaking out against Moses, she destroyed the merit of her timbrel playing. Right. Whatever zchut, whatever rewards, right, she had, she lost them when she spoke out, right? And then you have another quotation from Kohelet, which is, "Don't let your mouth bring you into disfavor, and don't plead before the messenger that it was an error, but fear God, else God may be angered by your talk and destroy your possessions." So this is a very strong, very, very strong cry against people who talk against their leaders, against their betters, in general, who talk. And then you have here midrashim about Miriam, all right? And all of these midrashim about Miriam are about her slandering, right? And very often they're connected with the parsha that comes after this. This is chapter 12 at the end of Baalotcha. And chapter 13 is Shlach Lecha, which is about the spies. So it says that the spies should have learned from what happened to Miriam, right? And so why did the Holy One put this section next to the other, the one about Miriam speaking against her brother, and the spies who spoke out against the land, right? So for Miriam had spoken against her brother and had been smitten with leprosy, in order that all might know the penalty for slander, and that if people were tempted to speak slander, they might reflect what happened to Miriam. Nevertheless, the spies did not want to learn, okay? In other words, even though they're giving a warning by what happens to Miriam, right? Even though they're giving a warning, it doesn't help them because they didn't learn. Yes, Stevie, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, I have a question. So are they, he, it, whatever, are they equating saying anything bad with slander? Because
Yes,
to me,
yes.
the spies didn't lie. That's how they perceived those people to be, except Aaron and Caleb saw them for who they were, the people in Canaan.
But it's considered slandering the promised land. It's considered to be slander, right? And they make that equation. And by the way, this is called, in Hebrew, it's called smichut parshiot. When you have one parsha next to another one, and why do you have them next to each other, right? And sometimes it's also said, expressed this way, Ma inyan shmita etzel har Sinai. Why do you have the discussion about Shemitah, all of the laws about Shemitah, which is, saving things for the seventh year, right? And then you have to have Shemitah, is you can't use the land in the seventh year. And Har Sinai, in other words, why do you have those two things together? So this idea of Smichut Parashiyot, having two Parashot, just the fact that they're next to each other is a commentary, right? This is the principle that we have here. Okay. Yeah, Barbara, you have to leave. Good. Okay, and not good, but okay. It will be recorded. So okay, Louise, yes, question.
Yeah, so the text reads that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. She's the only one that's punished, and she's the only one that's quoted. I mean, that she speaks first, but clearly the two of them had spoken earlier against Moses. So are there any midrashim at all about the fact that Aaron gets a free pass here? I mean, they all seem to be about Miriam and not
Right.
about him at all.
Well, that the immediate parsha, and if you look at even Rashi, it starts out with Batid Daber, right, which is the feminine, right? Batid Daber Miriam Aaron. So it's, in other words, she is the speaker, right? And he's like, just comes second. That's the rabbi. That's a rabbinic justification for blaming just her.
Yeah,
Plus,
they read it that Aaron is just listening. He doesn't actually speak the slander, the gossip, he only hears it.
right.
Is one interpretation of the Hebrew.
And he goes along, just like he went along with the golden calf, right? He goes along. He's a good listener.
Who
Okay.
gets away with it, obviously.
Right. Okay. So wait, let me just go back to the sharing. Okay. Share. Okay, so that's one. But then it goes on. Anyone who's so arrogant, this is another midrash, right? So this was from Numbers Rabbah. Now the next one is from Deuteronomy Rabbah, another midrash on the book of Deuteronomy. Anyone who is so arrogant as to speak against one greater than himself causes the plagues to attack him. And if you do not believe this, look to the pious Miriam, right? At least they call her pious. Look to the pious Miriam as a warning to all slanderers. In other words, if it can happen to Miriam, the rest of you better be, but notice who was so arrogant as to speak against one greater than himself, right? So in other words, we shouldn't be criticizing our presidents and prime ministers, right? No, I'm joking, but okay. Rabbi Isaac said, another midrash on also in Deuteronomy Rabbah, it is like the snake that bites everyone who passes by, and it's surprising that anyone is willing to associate with it. So Moses said, Miriam spoke slander against me. That I can understand, since women as a rule are talkative. So now we're going from Miriam to all women. Okay, notice how we have this here. Okay, and then finally, in the continuation of this, right, it's still Deuteronomy Rabbah 6:11, and so is the previous one. Rabbi Levi said, women possess the four following characteristics. They are greedy, inquisitive, envious, and indolent. The rabbis add two more characteristics. They are querulous and gossips. Whence do we know that they are gossips? For it is written, and Miriam spoke. Okay, so now we have.
Inquisitive is a bad characteristic.
Well, apparently, yeah. It's like not minding your own business.
Asking too many questions.
Asking too many
questions. That's really bad, right?
I agree,
It
absolutely.
could lead you to question authority.
Why doesn't Moses get blamed for slandering Miriam? She's talkative, she's inquisitive, she's querulous and gossips. No, Moses gets away with that. And
Okay,
Aaron with things because he doesn't want to lose his job.
Okay, no, well, first of all, Moses doesn't say that. The rabbis has Moses saying it.
Oh, okay. Well, he thought it, I'm sure.
No, it's God who thought it. No, Moses says, he's
He actually prays for her.
right? And he prays for her, right?
Yeah,
So now we have something really interesting things about gossip. All right. So all right. So I have here that first of all, I would argue that gossip is not necessarily a bad thing. All right. So Jewish tradition does view gossiping, lashon hara, as a great sin. All right. The Chafetz Chaim, Yisrael Meir Kagan, 19th century Polish rabbi, published lots of volumes on the harm from defaming others, on lashon hara. All right. Rambam, Maimonides, describes tale-bearing, and pay attention to this, as any statement that, if spread from one person to another, would harm someone's property or their body, or even frighten or annoy them. The prohibition is mentioned in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, and some commentators also regard gossip as violating the Torah's commandment to remember what God did to Miriam, the sister of Moses, who was struck with leprosy for having spoken ill of her brother. In other words, this whole idea of gossip looking to be something as something negative, all right? In other words, and up here, this is an article, I guess this was in Jerusalem Post, right? By Judy in 2024, Judy Siegel-Itzkovitz, right? U.S. professors argue that rumor mongering has its upsides too, okay? So this is the continuation of that article, all right? Let's see. Marsha, would you like to read that?
Which scientific researchers in the U.S. claim that rumor mongers and slanderers, quote, get a bad rap. The theoretical research conducted at the University of Maryland and Stanford, why is Stanford underlined? Stanford University in California, argues that gossipers aren't all that bad. And in fact, they might even be good for social circles. From Mesopotamian cities to industrialized nations, gossip has been at the center of bonding human groups, but ferociously opposed by Jewish law. Yet the evolution of gossip remains a puzzle. Their study revealed that gossip is good at disseminating information about people's reputations that can help recipients of these tips connect with cooperative people while avoiding selfish ones. When people are interested in knowing if someone is a good person to interact with, if they can get information from gossiping, assuming the information is honest, that can be a very useful thing to have, said study co-author and professor emeritus Dana Now of the University of Maryland's Computer Science Department.
Okay. So here, we don't have to read this, but here you could just see here that this is part of that study here. And when you asked about what is the blue simply is a link that leads you to something else. When you see that, if you want to see the actual article, I could just go on the blue and I can read the actual article. So this is, you can see here that now, I think that gossip, I have the whole thing here, but I think that gossip is very interesting because with women in particular, right? With women in particular, you have, it's the only way we could get information out. If we don't, okay, I'm not gonna continue here because I see we're ready past our time. Let me just stop the sharing. Second, stop the sharing. with women in particular, gossip. The word gossip has a negative sound to it, right? Whereas, and in Hebrew, even worse, lashon hara, right? Evil speech. But what if we simply call this communication, right?
Information science.
Right?
Information.
Or dissemination of facts, right? By the way, it's dissemination sounds like semen, but okay. But whoops, I should probably. No, I'm still on. It's okay. That's it.
You're old enough. You're old enough to
We're
say.
all old enough to say that. But it's very interesting. So I mean, my argument is that men want to put down gossip. They don't want women to be able to communicate with each other. That's one way you could. A woman says, "My husband is beating me," right? And then with that knowledge, people could now protect her. But if she is unable to communicate, if she's stopped from communicating, if she's told that by telling something bad about her husband, she's gossiping, she's not going to do that, right? So it's very often this is what happens today. You know, when rabbis are accused of all sorts of things, how do they get away with it for so many years? Because you're not supposed to speak lashon hara about your rabbis or about important people, and that's how many people. You know, the Me Too movement started that way to a certain degree. Yes, Sneevy.
Wait a minute. Okay. So at Park Avenue, we were doing Mishnah Torah, and we were doing the part about gossiping, and we must have spent 3 weeks discussing on what the definition of lashon hara was, because if you're concerned about somebody and you ask somebody else whether they've seen that person, or because you're concerned, is that gossip? I mean, what is the definition of gossip, and what is the definition of being concerned or having to tell somebody something that negative about somebody for their own good? Or
Right. It's serious. It's a serious problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's a serious. By the way, books have been written about this, and the Chafetz Chaim has a whole, all these books there. But I'm just saying the fact that gossip is associated with women, right?
Oh, men gossip more than women.
I agree with you, but the fact,
Sorry, Norman.
I agree. But the fact that
I really think so.
yeah, but the fact that it's associated with women and then becomes negative, right? For sure. I mean, people say, why should men and women be separated in the synagogue and they shouldn't sit together? I think one of the reasons is so the men can be free to exchange information on Shabbat, instead of praying. Yeah, Norman.
But it's interesting that the rabbis excuse themselves when they slander all women by saying they have these 6 negative characteristics. That's purely lashon hara, but they're saved from that because there were no women among the Chazalim.
Right.
So they get away with it.
They probably perceived women because they didn't know women, right? They maybe knew their wives, they may knew their daughters, but if they're spending all the time studying, may not even know their own daughters and wives that well anyway.
I don't think Marcia and I are buying that.
No.
Let me finish
Surely
this.
that they included their wives and daughters among the set of all women. They're a subset of all women, so they have those same 6 negative characteristics.
They didn't say with some exceptions or with
No.
many. Say that. No, that's because it's true. Women's gossip is not always positive.
No one's gossip is always positive.
But we're just saying that there is some value to gossip because it's a way of sharing information.
So what would you, Marcia, what would you call the grandmother who gets on a chat group and spends a half an hour telling you everything good about her grandkids?
That's not gossip. That's false.
That's boastfulness, not gossip.
I know in certain circles, you know, or I mean, all of us are asked about somebody else, especially if somebody's dating or for a shidduch or something. And the question is, if you know there's the possibility of something, how do you answer that question? Do you say, this person is not a good person? Or I mean, how do you answer that? So you're not gossiping, and you're telling the truth in a obscure kind of way.
Okay, Toby.
I say that's not my story to tell, and I use that a lot.
Yeah, no.
It
You have to
isn't.
find a good way, and then you leave them. Anybody who understands, hamevin yavin. Anybody who understands there may be an issue there, and if you're interested in this whatever, it's your obligation to go further. But
Okay, Geraldine, yeah.
sorry.
Geraldine, you wanted to say something?
Well, that was a while ago after Norman, but you know, having worked with a lot of men, baby, they gossip more than anybody I know. I'm like, you know what? I used to think, no, they carry on. And then they pretend they can't cook, clean, or anything like that when they're home, when they have to do it at the station. Okay, I'm just saying.
I don't know.
We
agree. I think we agree. We have a little enclave here.
Susan, and then I want to say something. I don't want to forget what I want to say. So Susan, yeah. Sue Reese just left, but Susan.
Yeah, I was going to say similar to what Toby just said. When people ask me, well, how is so and so? What are they doing? I'm like, well, I really, would rather you ask them directly than have me tell you, because I don't want to say what anybody else is doing in terms of the tricky part, I think, is what Stevie was referring to before, is if somebody's not well and somebody else asks you or me or whatever, well, how is so-and-so? You're doing it out of kindness, but if somebody's really sick or something and they don't want to, if they're private people, it's very difficult.
Right, yeah. Right. So what I would like to just end with the two comments. One is, I think that part of what we see with the rabbinic sources is the fear of women, the fear of the power of gossip. That's one thing, right? I think there's definitely a fear, and maybe even a justified fear. So therefore, you have to condemn it, right? There are no exceptions to the rule. You just are, you should say nothing, right? And there's even this famous saying with Bruria that she's talking to some guy, and he says 3 words, and he says, "Why did you say 3 words? It could have been said in 1 word," meaning unnecessary speech is to be condemned. So this is one thing. And on the other hand, if you do ban communication, then a lot of evil can be perpetuated. In other words, if you're cutting down lines of communication, it could be a problem. And by the way, I don't know how many of you have ever been asked to write a letter of recommendation for someone, and then what do? All right. And are you honest or and all sorts of things. It leads to all sorts of questions. Anyway, it's definitely relevant to us today, where we have all going on in the world, constant bombardment of all sorts of things, intimate details of people, and I don't know what it communicates to all of us. So on that note, I'm going to wish all of you Shabbat Shalom.
Did you stop recording?
Stop recording in 1 second, and then we can also continue. 1 minute. I'm going to stop recording. Yes.